needed a night shift job bad. I stood there, shivering in the dead-eye chill of a Tuesday midnight, staring at that ATM screen like it was a holy relic. The machine was old, one of those clunky, off-brand ones in the back of a 24-hour bodega, and it was humming. A low, electrical thrum that I could feel in the soles of my sneakers. The green neon text was flickering, just a tiny bit, sending a rhythmic, nauseating pulse into the dark. Balance, $7.42. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just watched that blinking cursor, feeling the lump in my throat grow until it felt like a stone. Rent was due in 72 hours. My landlord, a guy who smelled like stale cigarettes and took a perverse pleasure in reminding people of their legal obligations. He wasn't the type for extensions. I could practically hear my dad's voice on the other end of a phone call I hadn't made yet. That heavy, saturated sigh. The long silence before he'd say, "Again, Leo, truly." That tone. The one that makes you feel 6 inches tall. I couldn't call him. I'd rather starve. I turned away from the machine, the bodega's bell chiming with a tinny mocking sound as I stepped back out onto the street. The campus was a ghost town. The street lamps were casting these long, distorted shadows that seemed to stretch and pull at the edges of my vision. I found myself walking toward the community board near the library, a massive, cork-covered wall layered with months of rotting paper and forgotten dreams. I was looking for anything: plasma donation, clinical trials, night shifts at the warehouse. But then I saw it. It wasn't buried under the others. It was pinned right at eye level, a fresh, crisp sheet of white paper with jagged hand-drawn black text that seemed to vibrate under the sodium light. Sitter wanted. One night only. Remote location. $500 cash. Inquire within. $500 for one night. It was an impossible number, a too-good-to-be-true number. My gut, that little voice that usually keeps me out of trouble, it gave a sharp, cold tug in my chest. But when you're down to $7, you don't listen to your gut. You silence it. You tell it to shut up so you can eat. I pulled my phone out. My fingers were so cold they felt like wooden dowels, and I dialed the number. I expected a machine. I expected a scam. Instead, it picked up on the first half ring. The man who answered, Mr. Ullman, he didn't sound like a local. He sounded like a ghost from a 1940s radio broadcast. His voice was deep, impossibly cultured, and smooth, too smooth, like he was reading a script he'd memorized a century ago. He didn't ask for references. He didn't ask about my major or my background. He just asked one thing, his voice dropping into a low, resonant hum. Do you have a reliable vehicle, Leo? And are you a young man who appreciates the sanctity of absolute silence? I told him I'd be there by 10. I didn't even ask what I was sitting for. I was too busy calculating how many boxes of ramen $800 could buy. The drive took nearly an hour, though it felt like I was traveling through different centuries rather than just miles. I watched the gas stations and the glowing neon of fast food joints fade away, replaced by the deep suffocating wall of the pines. My rusted Honda felt smaller out here. The engine's rattle, which usually felt like a familiar comfort, now sounded thin, vulnerable against the immense, pressurized silence of the back roads. The GPS had given up somewhere near the county line, leaving me to follow a set of handwritten directions that seemed to lead me deeper into a place where the trees leaned over the asphalt like skeletal fingers. their branches scraping against the roof of my car with a sound like long fingernails on a chalkboard. Then the house appeared. It didn't just sit on the land, it loomed over it. It was a Victorian monstrosity, a jagged architectural scar against the moonlight. It was all sharp peaks, blackened wood, and narrow, staring windows that looked like rows of dead eyes. There was a turret on the left side that pierced the night sky, and a wraparound porch that seemed to be receding into the shadows. I parked my car in the gravel driveway, the sound of the stones crunching beneath my tires, feeling violent, intrusive, in a place that seemed to be holding its breath. I sat there for a second, my hand on the keys, watching the house. There were no lights on in the windows, just a solid, impenetrable blackness. I stepped out, and the air hit me. It wasn't just cold, it was sterile. It didn't smell like the woods, it smelled like nothing. The front door creaked open before my foot even touched the top step. Mr. Ullman was waiting. He was tall, impossibly tall, and he stood in the frame with a posture that was so perfectly straight it felt unnatural. He was wearing a dark three-piece suit that looked expensive, but the cut was from another era entirely. Beside him stood his wife. She wore a high-collared black dress, her hands folded neatly in front of her. But it was her face that made the hair on my arms stand up. Her hair was pulled back so tightly into a bun that it seemed to stretch the skin of her forehead, pulling her eyes into a wide, unblinking stare. She was smiling, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. It was a perfect expression, the kind of look someone might practice in a mirror for hours, a masterpiece of the uncanny valley. "Leo," Mr. Ullman said. His voice was a low vibration that seemed to resonate in the floorboards beneath my feet. "You are punctual, a rare trait in the modern world. Please, come into the warmth." The foyer was a museum of the bizarre. The walls were covered in heavy, dark velvet drapes that swallowed the light from the dim chandelier, and everywhere I looked there were eyes. Taxidermy heads, deer, foxes, things I couldn't quite name, stared down from the walls with glass eyes that seemed to track my every movement. The air inside was thick with the scent of beeswax, lavender, and that faint metallic tang I couldn't place, like old pennies. "So," I said, my voice sounding thin and shaky in the vast hall, "where's the kid? You mentioned a sitting job." The room went cold. Mrs. Ullman's smile didn't falter, but her head tilted just a fraction of an inch to the side, a movement that was too smooth, too mechanical. "Ah," Mr. Ullman replied, clasping his hands behind his back. "A slight adjustment of expectations, Leo. There is no child. It is my wife's mother. She resides in the attic room. She is very old and very, very unwell. She requires absolute, unbroken silence for her rest. You won't see her. You won't hear her. We simply require a presence in the house while we attend our private engagement." He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. He fanned it open just enough for me to see the hundreds. "500, as promised," he whispered, "and another 300 for your discretion, for your silence. $800. I could pay the rent. I could buy groceries that weren't in a box. I could breathe again." I looked at the money, then at the dark, winding staircase that led up into the shadows of the second floor. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, to get back in the Honda and never look back. But the weight of that $7.42 in my bank account was heavier than my fear. I took the envelope. "I'll stay," I said. Mrs. Ullman's smile widened just a fraction, and for a split second I thought I saw her eyes flash with something that wasn't joy. It was hunger. Part 3. The Pulse of the House. Narration style. Heavy-limbed, disoriented, building into a breathless panic. The sound of their car fading away. It was the loneliest thing I'd ever heard. It wasn't just silence. It was a vacuum, a pressurized, heavy stillness that seemed to push against my eardrums until they throbbed with the rhythm of my own blood. I stood in the center of that foyer, clutching the envelope of cash, feeling the weight of the house settling onto my shoulders. Every floorboard I stepped on emitted a sharp, dry crack that echoed up into the dark rafters like a gunshot. I retreated to the den, sinking into the stiff leather sofa, trying to focus on my textbook. But the air in the room felt thin, as if the house were slowly breathing all the oxygen out of the space. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The grandfather clock in the hallway, its rhythm was changing. It was slowing down, stretching out, matching the heavy, sluggish beat of my own heart. The silence was so absolute that I could hear the house shifting, the wood groaning under the weight of its own history. I tried to distract myself, scrolling through my phone, but there was no signal, just a dead, gray screen. I felt watched, not by a person, but by the room itself. The taxidermy deer above the fireplace. Its glass eyes seemed to have a wet, human sheen in the dim light. I could have sworn its head had tilted a fraction of an inch to the left since I'd sat down. It was that uncanny valley sensation again. The feeling that everything around me was a clever imitation of a home, but underneath the wallpaper, something was very, very wrong. Then the hunger hit, a sharp, hollow ache in my stomach that felt almost desperate. I'd ordered a pizza from a place called Mama's about 40 minutes ago, the only place willing to drive this far into the trees. When the headlights finally splashed across the den walls, I felt a surge of relief so strong I almost cried. I ran to the door, but before I could even reach for the handle, the doorbell rang, a single, mournful chime. I opened it to find a delivery kid, maybe 20, looking like he'd just seen a ghost. His face was pale, his eyes darting toward the dark windows of the second floor. He didn't even ask for the money. He just shoved the box into my hands, his fingers trembling, and whispered, "You should leave, man. Just leave." Before sprinting back to his car, he peeled out of the gravel driveway so fast his tires spat stones against the porch. I should have listened. I really should have listened. I took the pizza to the kitchen. The white tiles were so bright they hurt my eyes. Sterile, cold, and perfectly clean. I ate 3 slices. They tasted wrong, metallic, like licking a copper wire. Within 10 minutes, the world started to tilt. My head felt like it was being stuffed with cotton, and my limbs, they were turning into lead. My arms felt like they weighed 100 pounds each. I tried to stand up, my knees buckling, my vision blurring into a dizzying swirl of white and black. I slumped against the counter, gasping for air that felt thick, like I was breathing through a wet cloth. My eyes landed on a calendar pinned next to the industrial-sized fridge. There was a massive red circle around tonight's date. Inside it, written in that same elegant, jagged script I'd seen on the flyer, were 5 words that turned my boiling blood to ice. The lunar eclipse. The vessel is ready. Panic finally cut through the drug's fog, a cold spike of adrenaline that forced me to my feet. I bolted for the front door, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. I grabbed the brass handle and twisted with every ounce of strength I had left. Nothing. It didn't even budge. It wasn't just locked, it was sealed. I threw my shoulder against the oak. Thud. It was like hitting a mountain. I ran to the parlor windows, tearing back the heavy velvet drapes, desperate for a way out. I reached for the latch, but my hand hit something cold, something hard. Iron bars, thick black security bars, had been bolted into the exterior frames. I hadn't seen them when I arrived. Or maybe I just hadn't wanted to see them. I moved from window to window, pulling back curtains, only to find the same cold iron. The house wasn't just a remote Victorian. It was a cage, and I was the only thing trapped inside. Then I heard it from the floor above, directly over the kitchen. Thump, drag, thump, drag. Something was moving in the attic. Something heavy. Something that was finally finished waiting. I stood at the base of the staircase, my hand trembling so hard against the mahogany banister that I could hear my fingernails clicking against the wood like a frantic telegraph. Thump, drag, thump, drag. The sound wasn't coming from the attic anymore. It was on the second floor landing. It sounded heavy, wet, like someone was dragging a carpet soaked in lead across the floorboards. I looked up into the throat of the house, and the shadows seemed to be coiling, dripping down the walls like black ink. My vision was tunneling now, the edges of my sight turning into a jagged, static-filled blackness. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt like it had been lined with sandpaper. The drug, whatever they'd put in that pizza, it was stripping away my ability to think, leaving nothing but the raw, screaming instinct of a trapped animal. I had to hide. I couldn't stay in the open foyer. The taxidermy heads were watching me, their glass eyes reflecting a light that shouldn't have been there. I forced my leaden legs to move, crawling more than walking, pulling myself up the first 3 steps. The air changed as I ascended. It didn't smell like beeswax or lavender anymore. It smelled metallic, raw, like a butcher's shop, left out in the sun. And then I saw it. A mirror hung at the turn of the staircase, a heavy, ornate thing with a tarnished silver frame. I caught a glimpse of my own reflection, and I nearly choked. My face, it didn't look right. My eyes seemed to be shifted just a few millimeters too high. My mouth looked too wide. My skin had a gray, waxy sheen. It was the Thatcher effect. My brain was misfiring, unable to process the image of my own features. I looked like an imitation of a human. I looked like a monster. I looked away, my stomach heaving, and continued to crawl. The mother, Mrs. Ullman, had mentioned. I could see her shadow now. It was stretched across the floral wallpaper of the upper hall, a long, distorted silhouette that didn't look like an old woman at all. It was too tall. Its limbs were too long, too thin, ending in shapes that looked more like hooks than hands. It stopped at the edge of the stairs. I froze, pressing my face into the moth-eaten carpet, praying the shadows would swallow me whole. I could hear it breathing, not a human breath. It was a wet, rattling whistle, like air being pushed through a punctured lung. Wah. Iss. Wah. Hiss. And then a new sound sliced through the dark. Headlights. I didn't see them. I felt them. A sudden, violent flash of white light cut through the stained glass window above the front door, painting a kaleidoscopic pattern of blood red and sickly yellow across the foyer. The gravel outside began to crunch under heavy tires. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The front door, the door I'd thrown my body against just minutes ago, gave a sharp, mechanical click. Leo, Mr. Ullman's voice drifted up from the foyer. It was louder now, resonant. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere at once. The moon is almost gone, Leo. It's time to stop playing. It's time to fulfill your purpose. I tried to pull myself further into the dark, but my strength was gone. I was caught between the thing at the top of the stairs and the family waiting at the bottom. Part 5. The Throat of the House. Narration. Style. Visceral, suffocating, and punctuated by the rhythm of a panic attack. The slide was narrow, impossibly narrow, a vertical coffin of rough-hewn oak and century-old dust that seemed to squeeze the very breath from my lungs as I fell. I didn't tumble so much as glide, my numb, leaden body scraping against the wood. I should have felt the splinters tearing through my flannel shirt. I should have felt the heat of the friction against my skin. But there was nothing, just a cold, disconnected sliding sensation, like I was a piece of meat being dropped down a chute. I hit the bottom with a sickening, muffled thud, landing in a pile of something soft, damp, and smelling of deep, ancient earth. I lay there in the absolute blackness, gasping for air that felt like it was filled with powdered bone. My heart was a frantic, erratic thing thumping against the floorboards of my chest like a bird trapped in a cage. Thump thump, thump, thump thump. I tried to move my hand to find some purchase in the dark, but my fingers felt like they were miles away, like they belonged to someone else entirely. When I finally managed to lift my hand into a sliver of light leaking through the floorboards above, I almost screamed. The Thatcher effect was worse now, much worse. In the flickering rhythmic light, my hand didn't look like a hand. The knuckles seemed to be on the wrong side of the fingers. The skin was a bruised, translucent violet, and the nails looked long, sharp, and jagged. My brain was screaming that this was wrong, that I was looking at a monster's limb, but I could feel the phantom sensation of my own thumb twitching. I wasn't just losing my mind. I was losing my shape. I was becoming the vessel they kept talking about. Above me, the house was alive with a sound that made my skin crawl. It wasn't just footsteps anymore. It was a low, vibrating hum, a collective drone that seemed to be coming from the very walls. The cultists, the guests, they were chanting. It was a language that felt jagged, like the words were designed to tear at the throat of whoever spoke them. And through that drone, I heard the clicking. Click, click, click. The mother, she was right above me. I could see the tip of one of those long yellowed nails poking through a gap in the floorboards, testing the wood, searching for the seam of the hatch I'd just vanished through. Then, a face appeared. Not hers. Mr. Ullman Ullman knelt on the floor above, staring down through the cracks. The light from the black candles behind him cast his shadow over me, and for a second the uncanny valley hit me with the force of a physical blow. His face. It wasn't the smooth, cultured mask from the foyer. The drug was making the shadows dance, and his features seemed to be melting, sliding, his eyes becoming two bottomless black pits that stretched toward his ears. His smile was too wide, too many teeth, all of them sharp and needle-thin. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a sketch of a man drawn by someone who hated humanity. "We see you, Leo," he whispered, and his voice didn't come from his mouth. It resonated inside my own skull, a vibrating, oily pressure. "The earth is already claiming you. The cellar is the womb, and the eclipse is the birth. Don't struggle. The more you fight, the less room there is for him." I scrambled backward, my elbows digging into the damp earth, my breath coming in jagged, sobbing gulps. I turned, crawling blindly into the crawl space, my head hitting low-hanging beams that felt like ribs. The space was filled with things, old porcelain dolls with shattered faces, bundles of hair tied with black twine, and jars filled with a thick gray fluid that seemed to pulse in time with the chanting above. I reached a wall, cold, damp stone, and felt a draft. A heavy, iron-bound door was slightly ajar, leading deeper into the sub-basement. I pushed it open, the hinges screaming like a dying animal, and stumbled into a room that smelled of copper and ozone. In the center of the room, beneath a grate that looked directly up into the center of the foyer, stood a stone altar, and on that altar was a suit, my suit, a set of clothes that looked exactly like the ones I was wearing, but they were laid out like a body. And next to them, a bowl of dark, steaming liquid and a curved obsidian knife. The humming above stopped. The silence that followed was so heavy, it felt like it was crushing my ribs. "The shadow has touched the heart of the moon." Mrs. Ullman's voice drifted down, cold and final. "Bring the vessel to the stone." I heard the hatch above me tear open with a violent, splintering crack. The hatch didn't just open, it was ripped from the floorboards with a violent, splintering shriek of wood on wood. A flood of sickly, flickering blue light poured down from the kitchen above, cutting through the basement's stagnant air like a blade. I didn't wait to see who or what was looking down. I turned on my stomach, my numb, leaden limbs scraping against the cold, packed earth as I dragged myself deeper into the sub-basement. The air here was different. It was heavy, wet, and carried a cloying sweetness that made my stomach churn. The smell of rotting peaches mixed with the sharp, acidic sting of formaldehyde. I crawled through a narrow stone archway, my shoulders brushing against walls that felt soft, like they were lined with damp velvet. I reached out a hand to steady myself, but instead of stone, my fingers sank into something cold and yielding. I pulled back, gasping, as a sliver of light from the grate above illuminated the wall. It wasn't velvet, it was clothes. Dozens, maybe hundreds, of jackets, flannel shirts, and hoodies were pinned to the stone, hanging like the discarded skins of insects. I reached up, my hand shaking so violently I could hear my teeth rattling, and touched a denim jacket. A wallet fell out of the pocket, hitting the dirt with a dull thud. I fanned it open with my clumsy, spider-like fingers. A student ID stared back at me, a boy, maybe 19, with a bright, easy smile and a shock of blonde hair. Caleb Miller, the card read. I looked at the next jacket, another ID, Marcus Thorne, then another. Ethan, Tyler, Sam. They were all young men. They all had that same look in their eyes. The look of someone who had seen a flyer for $500 and thought they'd found a way out of their debts. I wasn't the first sitter, and I wasn't the second. I was just the latest arrival in a long, silent line of vessels. I backed away, my head hitting a low-hanging wooden beam. Something fell from the ledge above me, landing in the dirt with a metallic clink. It was a small, silver picture frame. I picked it up, wiping away the grime with my sleeve, and looked at the photograph inside. It was the Ullmans. They were standing in front of this very house, but they looked younger, not by years, but by vitality. Their skin was glowing, their eyes were bright, and their smiles were human. Standing between them was a young woman with long, dark hair and a face that radiated kindness. I looked closer, my breath hitching in my chest. The face. It was the same face as the mother upstairs, the same porcelain features, the same wide-set eyes, but in the photo, she wasn't a mask, she was alive. I realized then, with a soul-crushing horror, that the thing dragging its nails across the floorboards upstairs wasn't a mother at all. She was the first sitter, a girl who had come for the money and stayed to become a hollowed-out shell, a biological puppet kept alive by whatever rot lived in the foundation of this house. She wasn't an antagonist. She was a warning. Click, click, click. The sound was right behind me. I turned slowly, my heart stopping in my chest. The mother was crouching in the archway. In the dim blue light, the Thatcher effect turned her face into a landscape of nightmares. Her eyes seemed to be rotating in their sockets. Her mouth was a jagged, vertical slit that stretched from her nose to her chin. She wasn't looking at me with malice. She was looking at me with a profound, empty hunger. She tilted her head, her neck clicking with the sound of snapping dry kindling, and let out a low, vibrating whistle. Leo. The voice came from her throat, but it wasn't her voice. It was the layered, echoing drone of the cultists above. The transition is almost complete. Your skin is already beginning to feel like a stranger's, isn't it? Your memories, are they slipping? Do you remember your father's face? Or is it just a blur of gray ash? I tried to scream, but my tongue felt too large for my mouth. A thick, useless muscle that tasted of copper and earth. I scrambled backward, hitting the stone altar I'd seen earlier. The obsidian knife caught the light, gleaming with an oily, purple sheen. The robed figures began to descend the stairs now, their black silk garments hissing against the stone steps like a nest of vipers. Mr. Ullman led the way, his chest bare, his ritual scars glowing with a faint, rhythmic pulse that matched the flickering of the blue candles. He held a bowl of dark, steaming liquid, the same liquid that was currently systematically erasing who I was. "Don't fight the eclipse, Leo," he whispered, his eyes now entirely black, reflecting the void that was consuming the moon outside. The girl was a failure. She had too much spirit, too much self left inside. But you are hollowed out by debt and desperation. You are the perfect house for a god. They surrounded the altar, their humming becoming a physical weight that pressed me down onto the cold, flat stone. I looked up through the iron grate, and the moon was gone. In its place was a blood-red ring, a devil's eye staring down into the cellar. Mr. Ullman raised the obsidian knife, Part 7, The Final Occupant. Narration style, fading, ethereal, punctuated by gasps and the crushing weight of total psychological collapse. The stone of the altar was colder than the winter air outside, but I couldn't tell where the cold stone ended and my own skin began. I felt translucent, like a sketch of a human being that someone was slowly erasing with a heavy, smudge-filled thumb. I looked up through the iron grate, and the devil's eye moon stared back, a bleeding crimson ring that seemed to be pulsing in perfect time with the throbbing in my skull, my heart. It wasn't mine anymore. It was a heavy, mechanical hammer. Thud, 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 driving the last of my humanity into the dirt floor. The robed figures closed the circle. Their humming had reached a pitch that was no longer a sound. It was a vibration that felt like it was tearing my atoms apart. I could see the shadows on the walls dancing, stretching into shapes that defied geometry. Limbs that were too long. Heads that tilted at impossible angles. It was the uncanny valley of the soul. Everything about my existence, my memories of campus, the smell of my dad's old truck, the taste of that cheap pizza, it was all being compressed, flattened, turned into a thin, gray ash that was being blown away by a wind I couldn't feel. Mr. Ullman leaned over me, his face, it was a shattered landscape of shifting features. One eye was where his mouth should be. His nose was a jagged, vertical slit. His skin was the color of a bruised plum. The Thatcher effect had finally won. I couldn't recognize a human face anymore. He was just a collection of terrifying parts, moving in a horrific, synchronized dance. He held the obsidian knife above my heart, the blade reflecting the blood-red light of the eclipse. "The space is cleared," he whispered, and his voice sounded like 1,000 dead leaves skittering across a tombstone. "The debt is paid, the vessel is empty, and the guest is at the door." He didn't stab me. Not at first. He traced the tip of the blade along my collarbone, and instead of pain, I felt an opening, like a zipper being pulled down my chest. I felt myself, the core of who Leo was, spilling out onto the cold stone like spilled ink. I tried to cry out, but my mouth was no longer under my control. I felt my jaw unhinge, stretching, wider than a human jaw should ever go. My tongue felt like a thick, dry root, and my teeth, I could feel them sharpening, grinding against each other with a sound like breaking glass. "Look at me, Leo." Mrs. Ullman's voice drifted in, but she was standing behind me. I could feel her cold, skeletal fingers tracing the outline of my eyes. "Don't look at the knife. Look at the moon. See the eye? It's looking for its new home. It's looking for a place to rest its weary, ancient sight." The mother, the porcelain-faced puppet, crawled onto the edge of the altar. She leaned over me, her mask-like face inches from mine. For a second, her black hollow eyes met mine, and I saw a flash of the girl from the photograph. She wasn't screaming, she was waiting waiting for someone else to join her in the gallery of the hollowed. She tilted her head, click, and a single black tear fell from her eye, landing on my cheek. It felt like liquid fire. Mr. Ullman raised the knife for the final strike. "Now," he growled, the word vibrating through the stone and into my spine. The blade came down, not into my heart, but into the center of my forehead. I didn't die. I expanded. The world turned blood red. I felt a presence, something vast, something ancient, something that smelled of the beginning of the world and the end of time, pushing its way into the space where Leo used to be. It was like a hand sliding into a glove that was far too small. I felt my ribs crack as they moved to accommodate the new weight. I felt my eyes roll back into my head, and suddenly I wasn't looking through my eyes anymore. I was looking through the red ring of the moon. I saw the house from above. I saw the Ullmans kneeling around my body, their faces turned upward in ecstatic terror. I saw the mother collapse into a heap of discarded silk and porcelain, and then I felt the hand, the entity, the guest. It took hold of my vocal cords. My mouth opened and a sound came out that wasn't a scream. It was a roar that shook the very foundation of the house. It was a name that made the black candles blow out and the iron bars on the windows rattle in their frames. Silence fell. The eclipse passed. The shadow slid off the moon, leaving it pale and indifferent once again. I stood up. My limbs felt different, longer, stronger. I looked down at the altar. There was a body there, a boy in a flannel shirt with a pale, empty face. He looked like someone I might have known once. A boy named Leo, who had $7.42 in his bank account. I stepped off the altar, my bare feet hitting the dirt with a heavy, purposeful thud. Mr. Ullman looked up at me. He wasn't smiling anymore. He was trembling. He pressed his forehead into the dirt, his voice shaking with a terrifying, primal awe. "Master," he whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I walked toward the stairs, my new eyes adjusting to the dark. I didn't care about the rent. I didn't care about the disappointment in my father's voice. I just wanted to see what the rest of the world looked like through the eyes of a god.